Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this cold and wintry evening just as we're starting the new term. We're here to talk about a remarkable and important event and the response to it. I know all of us were shocked by December's Indian Ocean earthquake and the ensuing tsunami, and the scope of the devastation was really beyond comprehension, I think, for most of us. Television pictures really have no effective way of conveying them very well, and we see new images with each passing day. Now, behind me here is a map that sort of shows the area that was affected. It's an extraordinarily large area. The waves of the shock waves traveled at 500 miles an hour, the speed of a jet plane through the ocean, and ultimately led to enormous destruction. And, because the Kennedy School is itself such a global community and has so many different people from so many different nations, this has affected many of us. We've lost loved ones, family members, and for many the wounds are still quite fresh and will be for a very, very long time to come. And I guess I'd like to start by just asking all of you to join me in a moment of silence in honor of the loss of lives, the lives lost in Indonesia, in Sri Lanka, in India, Thailand, the Maldives, Malaysia, Burma, Bangladesh, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Seychelles. So if we could just have a moment of silence. We're here not only to honor those who lost their lives, we're also here to recognize and learn from those who have been very active in trying to pick up the pieces and find a new future and support those who have been so tragically affected. And as classes begin and our schedules become more hectic, I think this is an appropriate time to remember those people who are still struggling with the tragedy and the people here and among our community that have been very, very active in lending a hand. And so while the devastation is indeed staggering, the outpouring of reaction, I think, has been equally remarkable in many respects. And the work of a great many of aid agencies and many, many individuals has been really quite unbelievable. The global aid organizations report just millions of dollars involved in various ways. And people at Harvard have been involved in many ways as well, even to the point where we've had a variety of different organizations that have done benefit concerts, a variety of other kinds of activities. The university itself has agreed to match donations of up to $100, and several $100,000, as I understand it, have been pledged in various parts of things. So it is a moment when we come together, and it's a moment when we think about this tragedy as well as many others that affect so many folks around the world. I don't want to say very much more than that, except to again thank all of you for your interest and your concern and so on. And the outpouring here from the Kennedy School has been also equally remarkable. And tonight, and one of the things that you can see, there's a KSG Tsunami website. I hope you all have seen it, because it does illustrate the kind of enormous caring about people that's really the driving force for so many of our activities here at the Kennedy School. So with that, I'd like to get started. And joining us for the discussion are our three Kennedy School students and a member of the faculty. And I'll just introduce them as we go along. The three students are Dimitri Patnaik, Dimitri, Ari Perdana, and Indahil Ranaviraji. I'll try and do better the next time. My American is just a disaster. And we also have a Kennedy School faculty member, Jay Rosas, and my name is Dave Allo. It's my very great honor to share the stage with these people, even if I'm not very good at pronunciations, because they have done remarkable things and they'll continue to do remarkable things. There's one other person who's in the audience I did want to recognize, however, which is Helene Daniels, who has been very active and very involved in our own efforts here at the Kennedy School. Let me start now and move to Dimitri. And she's a Mason Fellow from India in our mid-career program. And she volunteered with Action Aid International to provide support and relief and rehabilitation in Sri Lanka. And with her prior experience in long-term community-based rehabilitation, she helped Action Aid set up its Sri Lankan operations in the aftermath of the tsunami. And so, Dimitri, if you could please tell us a bit about your experiences.
Thank you, team. Like most of us here, I also sat on 26th of December looking at the television. Sorry, I don't have a television. On the online internet, just hearing the news and seeing the way things were unfolding in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I was totally devastated and felt totally helpless that I'm so far away in Boston and not being able to do something. What I felt was I need to feel useful and contribute to the process of relief and rehabilitation and be of some use. And so I volunteered with Action Aid International. And I didn't go to India because I felt Sri Lanka was a country which was needed, although Indonesia was the worst devastated country. But somehow the cultural ties with Sri Lanka made me choose to volunteer in Sri Lanka. And moreover, Action Aid did not have an operation in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, 31,000 people have died of tsunami. Around 234,000 people have been affected, and 109,000 people have been displaced and lost their homes and property due to tsunami. With this huge, large-scale devastation, the government was not actually prepared for such devastation. There have been conflicts in civil wars within Sri Lanka. So people would say, okay, the country is always in an emergency situation. But this was something which they were not prepared for. So but one thing which was very remarkable was the way the government of Sri Lanka, and I also must acknowledge the way the northern part of Sri Lanka, which was controlled by LTTE, the way they responded to the crisis. The government and LTTE both responded within 24 hours, which is very good in terms of response time in such devastations. And as far as my experience in two disasters in India goes, I didn't see the chaos. I was there in 4 days after disaster and things were moving. What my role was to do a country assessment, find out what actually are the relief and the rehabilitation needs, whether the organization needs to work there, because when such a devastation happens, along with cameramen and news persons, journalists, a lot of aid workers and aid agencies also go to those places. So we wanted to find out, are we going to really bring about any difference to the country, to the affected communities and people, or we're not, or we're just going to join the bandwagon. So my job was to do an assessment and find out where are we going to work, which are the areas or issues we're going to focus on, where there's a gap, and who are we going to partner with. Because the way we work is we have to use local resources, organizations, and work with them, and that's the way we could be effective. And then I traveled in the northern and eastern regions and in the south, and finally we decided to work in north and south, focusing on a need assessment and providing immediate relief and entitlement needs. And in entitlement, we were looking into the policy issues. The country doesn't have a proper disaster management policy, so looking into what would be the long-term rehabilitation policy like, what are the gaps in it, and how do we really address the needs of the most marginalized groups or communities who are women, children, people with disabilities, and elderly people. And to provide psychosocial care, because most often we forget to address the emotional needs of people because everyone is so concerned with the brick and mortar, trying to rebuild homes and infrastructure, that we forget that who's been affected are human beings. So we work with the government of Sri Lanka. We are supporting the Prime Minister's office in coordinating information, collecting information, and trying to coordinate the different activities of different NGOs and international NGOs so that we make sure that aid is reaching people in a much more effective manner. And we're working with the education department, so we trained teachers, worked with the children in school and we trained them on psychosocial care. We did a lot of play therapies so that we wanted to bring the children to somewhat lead a normal life, come back to school, and rebuild their lives. We started focusing on women's issues because we think this could be used as an entry point to address a lot of issues and also issues of peace building. The learnings from after 30 days of this disaster are that aid has not been reaching, it's not equitable, it's not reached all the areas in an equal way. There's been more focus in areas which are more visible, like in the famous tourist areas which are in the south, and not in the interior, poorer parts of Sri Lanka, where people are affected because they had come to the coastal areas for trading or business purposes and had been swept away. There's lack of coordination between different districts and provinces, and the government needs to do something about it, and because there's less information sharing between these different provinces and districts. The other thing is the international community and organizations have pledged funds, but the funds have not come through, and that's going to be a big challenge because now the limelight has shifted from front page news to third page, or it's vanished. So the fear is those aid might not reach people or the government of Sri Lanka, and the government of Sri Lanka has estimated that they need $3.5 billion to rebuild Sri Lanka, whereas now the three leading lending agencies, Asian Development Bank, Japan Bank for International Cooperation, and the World Bank have estimated that Sri Lanka would need only $1.5 billion. So this is a big challenge and a major constraint. And what we need to look at is whether we can use this opportunity for better long-term rehabilitation and humanitarian work because of the way the entire international community has supported and come together to address this devastation, and how we can address the issues within Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Our next panelist is Ari Perdana. Ari Perdana. Mr. Perdana is a first-year MPID student. He's originally from Jakarta, Indonesia, and he's going to share with us the experience of being a citizen of the country that's probably been most seriously affected by the tsunami.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dean Elwood, and I also like to thank everyone in the Kennedy School and Harvard community for all the concerns, all the sympathy during these hard times for Indonesia and all the countries that was hit by the tsunami. When I first heard the news about the tsunami in December 26, it was in the freezing Cambridge morning. It took me some time actually to realize how bad, how devastating it was. Yeah, partly because of the snow, and the other reason is that during these past few years, the Indonesian people has been in a series of natural disasters, tragedies, violent conflicts, as well as bombings, incidents, and terrorist attacks. So at first, I was not too sensitive about this. I was only thinking that, okay, this is just another bad luck for the country. Then later on, I realized that the situation was truly unbelievable. So it was not just another bad luck for the country. It is more than a usual situation. In terms of the death toll and the scope of the damage, maybe it was the worst thing ever happened to the country, if not the worst things that ever happened. Then the situation also got worse because the tsunami hit the regions that are more or less remote. So if you can see on the maps, the most affected regions was the northernmost part of Sumatra Island. It was the first one is Nias Island, somewhere a small island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It was a poor island, and the access to the mainland Sumatra was very limited. And the other region is the province of Aceh. The province has been under a martial law and civilian emergency since last year because the government has been combating the separatist movement for these past few years. So the access for the media has been very limited. Despite the death toll for all the countries is the highest in Indonesia and only from both two regions. It was only later in the December 26 that the first video footage and also the detailed story in the internet from Indonesia appears in the media. And the remoteness of the region also made the humanitarian aid and workers, the access to the regions very much difficult. On the first week after the tsunami hit, there has been reported that there is a backlog of distributions of goods and also workers from Jakarta and Medan to the regions. Even though the goods has been transported to the regions, it's very difficult to reach the locations that has been the hardest hit by the tsunami because the access to the places are full of ruins and also the debris being hit by the tsunami. But on the brighter side, I was very touched to see how the international community reacted to this disaster. I'm also touched by the initiatives and enthusiasm for many friends here in the U.S., even people like the three willing to go there to work as voluntary workers. Here the Indonesian community in Boston and Cambridge, receiving numerous emails asking about how to send the aids, even asking how to be voluntary workers to go to Aceh and Nias. It is no brighter side. And also on the government-to-government level, many countries have been so helpful in pledging the aids. I know that there has been a debate here in the U.S. whether the government has been giving enough for the victims, whether the government has been pledging enough aids for the countries in the regions that's hit by tsunami. Another debate is that whether the aids pledged by the countries are truly aids or partly are just another new debts that we may have to repay in the future. But I mean, apart from that controversies, I want to point out that there is the international solidarity is very touching, and maybe this is a strong base to build the new world in the future based on the solidarity and trust among the countries. And looking for the future, I hope that this tsunami can be a moment for change to Indonesia. For the government, I hope that first it can be a moment to show that they are capable of handling and managing such huge task of recovering and reconstructing the regions, particularly Aceh and Nias. Especially this is a new government, only about 3 or 4 months in the power. So it's a moment for them to win the heart of Indonesian people and also for Aceh peoples. And more importantly, they have to show that they can manage this huge task without being corrupt. That's the main thing. Second thing, this is a moment for the Indonesian government to negotiate the peace talk with the separatist group, Free Aceh Movement, and to bring an end to the prolonging conflicts which has been made the region suffering for more than 3 decades. It's also the moment for the government to improve and strengthen the relationship and cooperation with the neighboring countries and also the Western countries, for example, the US and Australia. The relationship between the Indonesian government and those governments during this war on terror are more or less, it's not too good. It's not bad, but it's not too good. But this is a moment to strengthen and improve the relationship. And for the Indonesian people and the society, this tsunami should be a moment for rebuild the unity and solidarity among each other, because these past few years, especially after the end of the Suharto regime in 1998, Indonesia has been a series of bloody conflicts, violence, and tragedies, and to some extent it has eroded the solidarity and also the trust among the Indonesian societies. And this could be a moment that if America have 9/11 to unite together, and I hope that this can be a so-called 9/11 for Indonesia in terms of to unite behind the new government to help the regions. And also, this moment should also be the moment to rebuild the trust among each other, especially among people from different religions. There is a special thing about Aceh, because the region is one of the region in Asia in which the Muslim culture is very strong there. It has a nickname. Aceh has a nickname of the strong porch of Mecca, because a very strong Islamic culture there. So when the disaster happened, there is temptation to relate these issues into the religious issues. For example, there are rumors that the Muslims there did not want to receive help from the non-Muslims. They don't want to help the non-Muslims. They don't want to bury the bodies of the non-Muslims. On the other hand, there was rumors that some Christian groups wanted to adopt the orphans, the children of Aceh, in order to raise them as Christians. But fortunately, these issues has been countered mostly by the people working on the fields. So this is a good sign for me that this disaster, these religious-related issues doesn't have to be adding much troubles for Indonesia. So to end the discussion, that finally my heart as well as your heart is always for those who are the victims, who lost their loving ones because of the tsunami. And once again, I thank you all very much for all this, your support and concerns.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ari. Next we'll hear from Intihil Ranaviraja. I don't know, tonight's a bad night. Ranaviraja. And Intihil has been, she's a first-year student, MPP student from Sri Lanka, who's been working with her fellow KSG students and the KSG administration here to respond to the tsunami crisis. She's planning on traveling back to native Sri Lanka this summer to assist ongoing relief efforts. Intihil, perhaps you can tell us more about the work you've been doing.
Sure. Thank you, Dean Elwood. During 20 years of civil war in Sri Lanka, more than 60,000 people have lost their lives. So within 2 to 3 days, the tsunami left 30,000 people dead, and more than 500,000 people are still displaced as a result. And Sri Lanka is a country the size of West Virginia, with a population of 19 million. So as you can imagine, every Sri Lankan in the country in some way or form has been affected by the tsunami. Also, as a result of the tsunami, Sri Lanka has received unprecedented attention and support from international governments, aid agencies, and also the media. So if this promised aid and support is leveraged and harnessed properly, I really believe that this gives the country an opportunity to bring about a permanent and peaceful resolution to the conflict. In my mind, this would be the cornerstone for long-term growth for the country and prosperity for the people. The Sri Lankan, as a Sri Lankan myself, if I could speak for the Sri Lankan diaspora, I know that they have been very touched by the generosity and the goodwill of the American people. There was an immediate response and willingness to help in some way or form. Here in the Kennedy School, we saw students like Alexandra Zuber and Milan Marinov, who quickly drew our attention to giving opportunities. I am a firm believer in strengthening our local capacity. So after I was able to get over the initial shock of the tsunami crisis, I focused on putting together a relief document which would provide credible government agencies, local NGOs, and also international NGOs who have had a long presence in the country, wanted to compile that in one document so people who were interested in supporting and developing our local capacity could do so. And immediately after that, as I started working on this, I approached my Kennedy School classmates and friends to put similar documents together for the rest of the countries. Because while I was able to do something for Sri Lanka, I knew that people like Ari Perdana would be better able to produce similar documents for Indonesia. Our effort gained a lot of momentum, and our program director, Helene Daniels, joined in the effort. With her encouragement, support, and guidance, we were able to efficiently mobilize and put together a series of value-added informational documents for those who wanted to fund these local-based relief initiatives. So just wanted to let you know that even though you see one student up here for this Kennedy School Relief Initiative, you should visualize many of your Kennedy School classmates, because it took a collaborative approach to put together this webpage. My friends Jeff Lucas and Scott Taylor mentioned to me early on in our efforts, Indonesians don't feel bad to ask me for my time. I really just want to make a difference. So Jeff, Scott, Chris Carter, Yahweh Ye, Arlie, Roshana, the list goes on and on, Dave Fogelson, and others who took time away during the holidays from family and friends to join in and work on this initiative. My heartfelt thanks and gratitude to all of you, not just because you helped on the tsunami effort. I know you did that out of kind of kindness in your heart, but your warm support and quick response served as a reminder to me as to why I chose to be here at the Kennedy School. In the first place, it's the Kennedy School's track record and commitment to public service. IOP Director Bill White and Aileen Grunder, thank you for the support that you have extended to us. And most of all, Ms. Daniels, Dean McCarthy, and Dean Elwood, thank you so very much for your enthusiasm and creating the enabling environment for all of us. The real work lies ahead of us, and we look forward to your continued guidance and support as we move ahead to focus our effort on a sustainable and comprehensive strategy to support the relief and rehabilitation initiatives. Fellow students, I know that some of you have been personally affected by the tsunami, and some of you have been actively engaged either by traveling to the affected countries or fundraising in your home states and communities. Unfortunately, the timing of this event did not permit for us to have broader participation, but if there's adequate time during the Q&A session, I hope that Dean Elwood would invite you to briefly make comments and share your experiences with us, or invite you at a later date to participate in an event so we can, in some events, follow-up events, so that we can really learn from your experiences. We have here with us Manjeev Jayakumar, who's a second-year second-year MPP, who lost 2 extended family members who are vacationing in Sri Lanka. So we can only imagine how he and his family dealt with the loss. But I think Manjeev has been dealing with his grief in the most positive manner. He has made a commitment to help those who have been left behind in the long term. We are all gathered here for one primary reason, among others, to find out how we, the Kennedy School community, can constructively and sustainably be engaged in tsunami relief and rehabilitation efforts in the long term. My fellow MPP classmate Lilian Zhao is exploring the possibility of compiling a tsunami-related internship database. Lilian will be sending an invitation email out to the community soon so that we can meet in a group to explore the feasibility of the database proposal as well as any other ideas you have. In addition, we also have, few of us at the Kennedy School have been exploring this idea to come up with a summer internship. This is to carefully identify opportunities for students and faculty to donate their time and expertise and match those skills with specific needs and priorities expressed and articulated by governments, local NGOs, and international aid agencies operating in these countries. So this will require a serious time commitment and a very hands-on approach, but the benefit would be that we would be able to have internships with very specific, strict criteria, which in turn will help ensure that whatever time we spend and efforts we expend will be well spent. So the focus is on identifying few quality opportunities as opposed to many for interested faculty, staff, and students. We would love to have your input to make this into a collaborative effort so that as we move to explore feasibility with the guidance and support of the Kennedy School administration and faculty such as Professor Rosengard. Professor Rosengard has independently put in considerable thought to this matter, so I'm sure he'll touch on this briefly during his talk. In closing, many students and alums have expressed strong interest in giving their time and energy to help with existing relief and rehabilitation efforts undertaken by the student body. I understand that there are several initiatives Kennedy School students are engaged in, but most of us are not aware of these efforts. In addition to efforts undertaken by the Kennedy School, there are many Harvard-wide activities also that have been undertaken. While it is to be expected that the initial response would be somewhat scattered, and even while acknowledging that a mixture of diverse approaches certainly has its value, I believe that there's tremendous potential for coordination. For example, Manjeev Jayakumar and I recently learned that few Harvard Business School students have secured the support of HBS faculty and administration to put together a summer internship proposal for Sri Lanka, which is very similar in form to what I talked about just a few minutes ago. So going forward, these students are very interested in working with the Kennedy School. So I would, I know that I said I was going to close earlier, but I'm really going to close right now. I know that many of us have been very quick to criticize donor agencies and recipient governments about the lack of aid coordination. So I'm hoping that we can serve as a model for excellence and join hands, not just within the Kennedy School, but Harvard-wide, whenever we can and whenever it makes good sense to work together, so we can minimize duplication and best utilize our collective skills, strengths, and respective networks. I believe that together we can maximize the impact of our good intentions, commitment to public service, and deliver small but tangible contributions to the ongoing relief and rehabilitation efforts owned and initiated by tsunami-affected countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. Our final panelist is Jay Rosengard. Jay is a lecturer of public policy and director of the Center for Business and Government's Financial Sector Program. He's lived and taught in Thailand and has actually spent roughly, 10 of the last 20 years in Indonesia. He speaks Thai and Indonesian and is now assisting governments as well as domestic and international institutions in formulating transitional recovery and long-term reconstruction strategies. Jay, if you could share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, Dean Elwood. I would also like to commend the KSG community on really truly inspiring initiatives have been taken, and we were kind of comparing notes before the forum started. And students have clearly been at the forefront, but it's not just current students. It's former students, alumni. We've all received messages, how can we help, how can we be of assistance? And it goes beyond students, faculty, staff, current, past. Basically, what they would say in Indonesian, the keluarga besar, the big family, the extended Kennedy School family has been involved, and it's really been quite inspiring. And one small example, you mentioned the possible internship, Tsunami internships, and in early January I sent a similar proposal to Dean Elwood, but it turns out I was more than a week late. You guys were already working on it, had already put together the beginning of a database. It's really quite nice to actually be behind the students. So that was just one example, and I think it's a good idea, and I think you're absolutely right. The key is really not the quantity, but quality, and trying to find appropriate matches between students and institutions and providing proper supervision and support while they're in the field. And I think that there is a commitment from all the parties concerned to try to make it work, but we have to be very thoughtful in how we approach it. I'd like to spend a few moments to talk about challenges that are facing the tsunami-affected regions following the emergency relief efforts. Until now, I think quite appropriately, all of the efforts have been to save lives, providing food, temporary shelter, dealing with post-disaster threats to public health, sanitation, public security. But what happens next? You know, when the CNN leaves, donors kind of get tired of it and move on to the next area. What's in store for the affected regions? And what we're really looking at are transitional recovery activities for the next 3 to 5 years, and then long-term reconstruction for the next 10 to 20 years. So a lot of the most difficult work lies ahead. And the challenge is to get markets to work again, it's to get families reconstituted, and it's to get communities functioning once more. It's quite a large set of tasks. And I think the key is to focus on trying to help people to help themselves. And that's trying to identify and concentrate on areas where private interests converge with public benefits. And based on experience elsewhere in similar types of disasters, the most successful approach has been a lot of labor-intensive public works activities. Doesn't sound very sexy, but it tends to be very effective, partly because of the focus and the simplicity. And what it does is it accomplishes a lot of things at the same time. First, it puts money in the pockets of consumers. You're creating purchasing power, you're creating market demand. You're allowing people to have the means to buy what they value most, which usually is housing, education, and medicine in the short run. And if you have some kind of effective demand out there, people with money willing to buy your products, it's much easier to start dealing with the supply side. For example, people have talked about microfinance or small and medium enterprise financing to restart businesses, to get people back into business again. But if there's nobody to buy your product, it doesn't work very well. There's some demand. The rest of it tends to respond much more quickly. At the same time, the public works is rebuilding the infrastructure you need to make markets work. You're talking about farm-to-market roads, other secondary roads, bridges. You're talking about basic power supply, communications, the markets themselves, some basic housing, all of the things you need to allow the market to function relatively efficiently and allow the resumption of production and trade activities. And actually in Indonesia, several years ago, there was very good experience with this type of program. It was called Padat Karya, which is labor-intensive. And it was labor-intensive public works. It had a tremendous impact to kind of kickstart rural development. What's also interesting in the Indonesian and perhaps the Sri Lankan context is that it was relatively low on corruption because it was very transparent. Wages were published, costs were published. When a bridge was built, the cost was posted, and where the money came from was posted. So the transparency and the accountability was increased. And when people knew how much they had earned for a day's work, it generally was very difficult to start skimming money and have a lot of other types of leakage. Leakage involved, I guess is the right word. There's some obstacles to this approach. In addition to your normal development problems, identifying appropriate investments, mobilizing community support to build, to maintain, to use these investments, we've got some very special situations that have been described. You've got, I mentioned aid fatigue. That is, people lose interest and pledges aren't fulfilled. We saw this in Iran with the earthquake. Most of BOM has not been rebuilt. Most of the community is still in ruins, and people are unemployed and unproductive. And people really would like to stand on their own, and it's not a very good example, but it's very common. You also have a very difficult physical environment. You mentioned the relatively remote areas. You've got a very sensitive political environment. They're essentially war zones. You've got tremendous pressure from the donor community to move the money. That's often not very helpful because you have some kind of silly ideas on how to spend the money quickly. You've got a lot of contractors chasing the contracts. You've got politicians peddling influence to try to award the contracts. And you're talking about big money. So there's tremendous concern about transparency, accountability. You mentioned good governance. And I think this is one of the biggest fears. But I also agree that this is a great opportunity. Perhaps we can learn from past mistakes. Perhaps rebuild higher quality, more sustainable communities. I'm also hopeful that perhaps there will be some unity in confronting the natural disaster to help transcend some of the long-standing political disputes. Perhaps there's some potential for conflict resolution, try to find some kind of accommodation. It's encouraging to see that, for example, that the government in Indonesia has resumed peace talks in Scandinavia with the Free Aceh movement. They stop and start, but at least the dialogue is beginning. There also seems to be a great desire on the new Indonesian government recently elected to improve transparency. I was surprised that they actually invited in Corruption Watch Indonesia to help design systems to monitor the flow of aid and to try to prevent and detect corruption in Aceh. That's a pretty tall order. And they've also agreed to publish monthly the sources and uses of aid flowing into Indonesia in response to the disaster. So, being an optimist by nature, I'm hopeful that the tragedy will actually create opportunities in the long run to make things better. I think I'll stop on a positive note.
Thank you so much. Normally at forums we solicit questions, and questions are certainly welcome, but we also this time would like to solicit your reactions, your stories, your remembrances, anything of that sort that you can bring forward for the panel. So we have microphones here, there, and there, and I'll just go around the room as we go forward. Let me just start here. Please state your name and
My name is Manjeev Jayakumar. I'm an MPP student.
it's not, the microphone doesn't seem to be on. Is it on? Don't I think
Shout.
it's controlled elsewhere, so it's fine. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much. I think this is a very timely topic, and it's a very appropriate one for the Kennedy School. And as a Sri Lankan citizen, usually we appreciate any attention we get in the news, but we appreciate the sort of very positive and supportive environment as well. But I worked in Sri Lanka fairly recently with the UNDP, and as a young person who, people here in the audience who might be interested in contributing indirectly by going to Sri Lanka, I want to say that you can make a difference in a small amount of time. In 2 to 3 months, you don't underestimate how much you can do, although it might be difficult to realize from here. However, once you get there, you will be frustrated by an enormous amount of things. First, there will be the expertise that you thought you are providing. It will probably already be there. There's probably going to be lots of duplication with different agencies the politics of it is all quite astounding and hard to comprehend within a month or two. But there are very interesting things that you can bring, and it might come in very sort of unexpected ways. One of the things, for example, is the ability to help local contractors. We're talking about big reconstruction projects, but most local contractors, small, I'm not talking sort of mom and pop firms, but with 20, 30 employees, really have no understanding of how to bid for these contracts and how to create a business plan and submit them to big UN agencies, the World Bank, and even to the NGOs. And these are small areas where a student working independently mostly can make enormous efforts and big difference in kind of reinvesting that money and providing a livelihood. So I want to encourage anybody who's interested in doing this to do so. And as long as you are flexible and energetic and creative mostly, you will be very effective. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any panel members want to respond, or just move on?
Hi, my name is Lillian Zhao, and I'm a first-year MPP, and I'm here to talk about the internship with the Tsunami internship program that Indanel mentioned earlier. The one thing I think we've all been hearing is this desire to help, not just financially, but with ourselves, our minds, our energy. And to try to capture that and harness that effectively, what we're trying to do right now is formally organize an internship program. It's going to be consisted of 3 parts. The first part is, as Daniel mentioned, a student-led initiative. Students with the networks, with the contacts in their home countries. We're going to try to get students to lead with the different countries, or to have student leaders of different countries to put together internships and opportunities for Kennedy students to be involved in those countries this summer. The second would be, as Professor Rosenberg elaborated on, a faculty-led initiatives. Faculty like himself putting together again, programs, internships for qualified students to be a part of, to be involved in on the ground in these affected countries. The third part is going to be focused on the agencies themselves. As we've all seen, there's been a huge outflow of donations to these agencies, and we want to place Kennedy School students with these agencies over the summer, whether it be in their headquarters or in their country headquarters or on the ground. So what we're looking for now is people who are willing to help out in putting together these programs, people with the networks, with the contacts in these countries and with these relief agencies to come forward and help us put together this database. There are a bunch of students, including Yahweh, that have been working on this. And so if you would like to be involved and have, these contacts or know of opportunities, please feel free to either email, any of the speakers or any of the panelists or myself. My email is lillian_Zhao@ksg06. And I look forward to working with many of you guys and making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? I actually have a question for the panel. A number of you spoke of the hope of using this as an opportunity to deal with larger challenges within the countries. All the countries that you deal with are torn by strife and in some cases bordering on civil war and the like. So far, do you think we're making progress in that regard? And are there lessons for all of us to learn from this in terms of what do we do to make this more likely to come out as a chance to build greater connections and greater cooperation and real hope, taking advantage of the best instincts that I think people bring to these things as opposed to the worst? Any thoughts? Dimitri?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for, like I mentioned, peace building rather than conflict resolution, because people in both the sides have been affected. So people are going to rebuild their lives, their livelihoods, their homes, their families all together. So this gives an opportunity to cross all the conflicts they have on religion, on religious grounds or ethnicity, and come together. And I think most often what we see, it's a problem with the politicians and with the international support and at the same time pressure. I think what the governments in these countries can move towards is more peace building. And the conflict, if we don't address it properly at this time, the conflict might worsen. Like if aid is not reaching equitably in the conflict areas and areas which are with the government, obviously people in the conflict areas would complain, and it would increase the tension rather than dissolve the tension between these parties. So I think it gives a lot of opportunities for peace building. When I was in Sri Lanka, I found a lot of people from Sri Lanka, which is not in the war zone, going to northern Sri Lanka, which is in conflict, and working there and volunteering. They just drove. What happened was a lot of people just drove with things, whatever they had, because they were all reacting to the situation. So now even a lot of people from the northern Sri Lanka have come down. Now there's this discussion between civil society, even the government officers, how to kind of send people and volunteers to work and volunteers from the conflict zone to come and work in the other areas, and volunteers to go and work in those conflict zones. So that would create some kind of peace-building efforts.
All right. What I have in mind is that this disaster happened in developing countries, which these people are not only poor, but they are vulnerable. What I'm saying with vulnerable is that you may not be poor at one time, but you have a risk to being poor due to external shocks, be it natural disaster or any kind of shocks. So this is, in the future, maybe we can make this tsunami disaster as lessons that for the development process, we not only have to deal with the poverty, but also have to deal with vulnerability. Because we have to build like a social safety net and like a disaster management so to prevent people going further into the poverty. I have my colleague here, Ron Luhur, from Indonesia. I think we've been discussing before the event about how this event can strengthen the relationship between Indonesia and some countries, for example, at the United States, due to the foreign relationship. Maybe Ron, we can ask Ron to have some thought about that.
Her second-year MPP from Indonesia as well. I think we're right to look at opportunities going forward, and what I hope for is that on the foreign policy front, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. Indonesia was a strong, important strategic ally to the United States through the Cold War, and we've had close ties that fell apart in the 90s due to an authoritarian government, due to human rights abuses committed by the military, resulted in a congressional act, and U.S. Military disengaged and foreign policy is basically shifted towards China and other Asian countries. I think this is an opportunity here. There's an opportunity, and as the largest Muslim country, the largest Muslim democracy, as well as a fledgling democracy, there's an opportunity here for the United States. I think that Paul Wolfowitz touched on this, Secretary Rice touched on this as well. I think there's an opportunity in the sense that the United States could re-engage simply just the Indonesian military could help to professionalize the military officer exchange programs, as well as just to help rebuild, or put together long-term plans with the Indonesian government to really strengthen, make sure that this fledgling democracy continues in a positive way with the guidance of the United States. Ari mentioned we also have a new president, so there's been a lot of optimism. He's been elected with a strong mandate, and because he supposedly represents the cleanest option with the least leakage and corruption. I think he also is, he's trained in the U.S., he's a military general trained in the United States. He's an economist. I think there are many good things, a ripe opportunity for re-engagement. The first step for that is Congress to step up, and I guess you have to repeal that act first.
Very good. Induni, did you want to?
I just have a brief comment. I think there's a tremendous opportunity in Sri Lanka for divided communities to almost rediscover one another. There have been, of course, these stories don't get well publicized. It's always the negative stories that receive the most attention. There have been so many stories about, how Tamil Tigers, soldiers, and then the Sri Lankan army have cooperated to bring about relief. Stories of ordinary citizens, just as Darithri mentioned, maybe majority Sinhalese citizens who have driven over, with a lorry load full of supplies, helping the, Tamil brothers and sisters. So you don't get an opportunity to hear about those stories as much. And I really wish that, the media would also be a little bit more responsible on that front, because you certainly see a lot of flashes about the aid being not equitable, especially to the north and the east. And I think there are many reasons, not to say that it's correct. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but certainly I think at a time where, the ceasefire talks have been kind of postponed since 2003, because it really hasn't moved forward. So I think there are various actors who are trying to take advantage of this situation. I think at first everybody's very committed and they want to work together to bring about relief because of the shock of it all. But sooner or later, people start looking at other advantages and opportunities. So I think that's where the danger lies. And I hope that, when each of you also read news articles, you're aware that there's always, to remind ourselves that there's two sides to every story. And just with the Sri Lankan community, I just hope that there are lots of good intentions. So I hope that the focus will really be on that, and the Sri Lankan government and the LTT are able to really use this opportunity to resolve this conflict, so that Sri Lanka can move to the next, move on with life, because we've been really stuck in a quagmire for so long, and there's really no reason to.
Jay?
Just to go back to Indonesia for a moment, I think there are a couple of things that are significantly different from before the tsunami, and one of them is that before, Aceh was essentially off limits to everybody. You needed special permits to go there. Journalists were not allowed to go there. Tourists were not allowed to go there. NGOs, civil society was very tightly controlled. Simply opening it up and having a lot of new people, new forces, creates new opportunities. And having a shock also changes the dynamics. It allows both sides to perhaps make what would have been seen as concessions before, maybe initiatives for the greater good. And it kind of goes back to the basics. If you look at Indonesia, the motto, the national motto, translates roughly as unity and diversity. Doesn't sound so different from another motto we know. Yeah? And so it's kind of going back to, special status. Is there something in between total independence and being another province? It's very similar to Sri Lanka. Maybe people can start looking a little bit more creatively. It's very encouraging that Bill Clinton was just appointed as the special envoy from the Secretary General of the UN. A lot of experience in trying to deal with these conflict scenarios. So I think having new people, new perspectives, new dynamics offers some new opportunities.
Terrific. Others want to make a comment or react? Anything else? Members of the panel, are there things you'd like to conclude with, or?
I would like
Dimitri?
to share an experience. We were having discussion, and this was with a large women's group called Valave Women's Federation, primarily headed by women, run by women. It's for women in Sri Lanka and the southern province. And there are like 4,000 members in that organization, and nearly all of them have been affected in some ways. They've lost their family members, their properties, and everything. And we were discussing as to what we need to do. And a woman called Haiti, I'm forgetting her name, she said, tsunami always hits us every day. I was like, sorry, I didn't get you. As a South Asian woman, we have tsunami every day in our life. Let's make the best use of this to address women's issues in South Asia. And it's really, that's something I would like to leave with all of you. Tsunamis hit women in South Asia every day, so we need to address that. And the other thing she told me is community, community, community. Don't forget us when you're doing all your national and international level policies and planning for rehabilitation, because it's us who've suffered and it's us who are going to suffer. So I would leave that.
All right.
Not for the comment, but just want to inform that this Friday evening, we, the Indonesian community, as well as the Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Indian community in Cambridge and Boston, will have a candlelight vigil for the tsunami victims. It will be very nice if you can be there together to pray for the victims.
It's a national effort, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. It was in a Copley Square in Boston, starting at 7.
Very good. Indonesia?
No other comments. It's just that if any of you are working on various initiatives in the Kennedy School or know of Harvard-wide initiatives, let's try to maybe put it somewhere together, maybe on the Kennedy School relief webpage, so that we can work together whenever we can, because I think, we can do probably small things over the summer, but rather focus on getting some small things done than massive projects that will never happen. So I really think we can make a difference, not only this summer, but looking forward, looking ahead.
Jay?
Thank you.
And I would just suggest two things. If you're interested in finding out what others are doing, go to the website. There's some just amazing stories of individual initiatives of Kennedy School alumni, so that, when you feel a little bit down, take a look at it. It kind of reaffirms your faith. And the other thing is, if you'd like either to contribute some expertise or you think you might have some special knowledge or skill, get into the database. Or if you know of an agency that might be a particularly good match or sponsor for a student or faculty, also database, because it's information, it's planning, it's really thinking creatively but being smart about it. So anything you can contribute in terms of information or leads would be very much appreciated.
Let me just add that one of the great things about the Kennedy School is, in fact, our great commitment to making a difference in public service and so forth. But it's also a commitment to learning. It seems to me there's much to learn from the this tragedy and our responses to it. And I hope that as we do those activities and so forth, we'll take these lessons forward, so the many other so-called silent tsunamis that we see across the world and the future tragedies that we all experience, we will be better at that, and we'll use these also as opportunities to build a better world and a more unified world. I want to thank the panelists for their extraordinary efforts and their participation, and I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward to make the world a better place. Thank you all very much.